The door to the penthouse opened before Elena Marchetti could knock, because it was never locked for her. She had a key. She had a name on the deed. She had a wedding ring on her finger and a child growing inside her, and none of that mattered anymore, because the moment she stepped past the threshold, she heard a woman laugh from the bedroom down the hall, and the laugh was not hers. She stood still for a second, one hand pressed to the curve of her stomach, the folder of papers gripped so tightly in the other that the edges bent under her fingers. The air smelled like perfume that was not her perfume. Candles burned somewhere. Soft music played, low and slow, the kind of music that was meant for two people who did not want to be interrupted. Elena walked toward it anyway. She had rehearsed this moment for 3 days, ever since her lawyer told her where to find him on a Thursday night when he claimed to be in meetings until midnight. She had imagined herself calm, composed, unshaken. She had imagined handing him the papers without a single tear falling. But nothing could have prepared her for what waited behind that door, because knowing a thing and seeing it were never the same. The bedroom door was half open, enough to see everything. Dante Marchetti, the man she married 2 years ago in a church full of powerful men who bowed their heads when he walked past, was lying against the pillows with his shirt open and his eyes closed, and a woman named Renata Cole was tracing her fingers along his chest like she owned every inch of him. Like she had owned him for a long time. Elena did not scream. She did not throw anything. She simply pushed the door open the rest of the way and stood there, and it was the silence that made Dante's eyes snap open. He sat up so fast that Renata rolled away from him with a small gasp, pulling a sheet over herself, her face flashing through shock, and then something closer to satisfaction, as if she had been waiting for this exact scene to happen. Dante stared at his wife. His mouth opened, but no words came out at first. He looked at her stomach, at the small round shape beneath her coat, and something crossed his face that might have been guilt if Elena had still cared enough to name it. "Get out," he finally said to Renata, his voice sharp enough to cut glass, but his eyes never left Elena. Renata did not move right away. She looked between them, calculating, the way she calculated everything. Then she rose slowly, wrapping the sheet around herself, and walked past Elena without a word, brushing close enough that Elena could smell her perfume again, thick and sweet and wrong. When the door clicked shut behind her, Dante stood up from the bed, buttoning his shirt with shaking hands. "Elena," he said, "this is not what it looks like." "It is exactly what it looks like," Elena answered, and her voice did not shake at all, which surprised even her. "I have known for 3 days. I just needed to see it with my own eyes before I let myself believe it." She stepped forward and dropped the folder onto the small table beside the door. It landed with a soft, final sound. "What is this?" Dante asked, though his face told her he already knew. "Divorce papers," Elena said. "I signed my part this morning. All you have to do is sign yours." Dante's jaw tightened. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and picked up the folder, flipping it open with the kind of controlled anger that made men twice his size step back in fear. But Elena did not step back. She had spent 2 years learning not to. "You cannot do this," he said. "You are my wife. You are carrying my child." "I am carrying a child who deserves a mother who is not lied to every single night," Elena said. "I am carrying a child who deserves better than watching her mother wait by a window for a man who is somewhere else, in someone else's bed." Dante's hand tightened around the folder until the paper crumpled at the edges. "Sit down," he said. "We will talk about this like reasonable people." "There is nothing to talk about," Elena said. "I found out where you have been going every Thursday. I found out how long it has been going on. 14 months, Dante. 14 months of dinners you missed and calls you did not answer and excuses about business that were never business at all." His face changed then, the anger sliding into something more desperate. "It was never supposed to mean anything," he said. "It was a mistake that kept happening. It has nothing to do with you and me." "It has everything to do with you and me," Elena said, Because I believed you. I believed every excuse. I stood in front of your family and told them how happy I was, while you were somewhere else pretending I did not exist." She turned toward the door, and Dante moved to block her path, his hand reaching for her arm. "Do not touch me," Alina said, and something in her voice made him stop cold. In 2 years of marriage, she had never spoken to him like that. She had been quiet. She had been patient. She had told herself that patience was a virtue, that a man like Dante needed time to open his heart, that the coldness was armor from a life that had forced him to build walls. She had made every excuse for him that he never had to make for himself. "Not anymore. I am leaving tonight," she said. "I already have a place to stay. You do not need to know where. My lawyer will be in contact with yours." Dante's face hardened into something dangerous, the mask of the man his enemies feared sliding back over the man who, for one moment, had looked almost human. "You think you can just walk away from me," he said. "You think the world works that way for someone married to Dante Marchetti." "I am not asking your permission," Alina said. "I am telling you what is already done." She walked past him, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat, waiting for him to grab her again, to shout, to do something to stop her. But he only stood there, watching her go, the crumpled folder still in his hand. At the elevator, her hands finally began to shake. She pressed the button and stared straight ahead at the closed doors, refusing to look back down the hallway toward the penthouse, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside, and only when they closed completely, sealing her away from that apartment and everything in it, did she allow herself to press a hand against her stomach and whisper that everything would be all right, even though she had no idea if that was true. Downstairs, a car was already waiting. Salvatore Marchetti, Dante's cousin, and the one man in the organization who had never once looked at Alina like she was simply an accessory to his boss, stood beside the open door with his coat collar turned up against the cold night air. "You did not have to come," Alina said as she approached. "I told you I would," Sal said. He opened the door wider and waited until she was settled inside before closing it and walking around to the driver's seat. For a while, neither of them spoke. The city passed by outside the window, lights blurring together, and Alina kept her eyes fixed on nothing in particular, trying to hold herself together one breath at a time. "He will not let this go quietly," Sal finally said, glancing at her in the mirror. "You know that." "I know," Alina said. "He has never lost anything in his life that he did not take back by force," Sal continued. "A business, a rival, a piece of territory. He does not know how to lose a wife." "Then he is going to learn," Alina said, and she was surprised by how steady her own voice sounded, even as her hands trembled in her lap. Sal was quiet again for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, almost like he did not want to say it at all, "For what it is worth, I am sorry. You deserved better than what he gave you." Alina did not answer right away. She looked down at her stomach, at the life growing inside her that had nothing to do with any of this, that deserved a mother who was not broken by a man who could not choose her over his own selfishness. "I am done waiting to deserve things," she said. "From now on, I am going to take them." The car pulled up outside a modest apartment building on the edge of the city, far from the tall glass towers where Dante's world lived and breathed. It was not much. A small 2-bedroom place that Alina had found through a friend, paid for with money she had quietly saved over the past year, just in case. She had told herself back then that saving money was only being careful. Now she understood it had been something else. A part of her had known, long before her mind was ready to admit it, that this day was coming. Sal walked her to the door and waited until she was inside before he left, promising to check on her the next day. When the door finally closed behind her, Alina stood alone in the quiet apartment, surrounded by boxes she had not yet unpacked, and let herself cry for the first time that night. She cried for the marriage she had believed in. She cried for the version of Dante she had convinced herself existed somewhere beneath the coldness. She cried because she was about to raise a child alone in a world that was far more dangerous than most people ever knew, a world where her husband's name alone could bring both protection and terrible danger crashing down on anyone connected to him. But when the tears finally stopped, something else settled into their place. Not peace, not yet, but resolve. Across the city, in the penthouse Alina had left behind, Dante sat alone in the dark, the divorce papers spread across the table in front of him. Renata had tried to return, tried to slide back into the space Alina left behind as if it belonged to her now, but Dante had sent her away with a single look that made even her hesitate. He picked up one of the papers and read his wife's signature at the bottom, small and steady, nothing like the shaking hand he expected from a woman he had spent 2 years believing was fragile. He had been wrong about a great many things, he realized. He had been wrong to think Alina would never find out. He had been wrong to think that even if she did, she would stay, the way every other person in his life stayed, out of fear or loyalty or simple lack of choice. He had been wrong to think he could keep hurting her forever, and she would still be there in the morning. Dante Marchetti did not know how to lose. He had built an empire on refusing to accept defeat, on taking back anything that was ever taken from him. But as he sat alone in the dark, staring at his wife's signature on a page that would end their marriage, he understood, for the first time in a long time, that some things could not be won back through force. Some things, once broken, stayed broken, no matter how much power a man held in his hands. And somewhere deep beneath the anger and the wounded pride, a single truth began to take root in him, one he was not yet ready to face. He did not want to let her go. But wanting was no longer enough. Alina was already gone, and the city outside his window stretched dark and wide, full of enemies who would soon hear that Dante Marchetti's wife had left him, and every one of them would wonder what that meant for the empire he had spent his whole life building. By morning, the news would travel through every family in the city, and for a man whose power depended on the appearance of total control, a wife who walked away in the middle of the night was not just a personal wound. It was a crack in the foundation, and in his world, enemies were always watching for cracks. Alina woke the next morning to sunlight cutting through curtains she had not yet learned to close properly. For a moment, in the fog of half-sleep, she forgot where she was. She reached out a hand across the bed, expecting the cold, empty space that had greeted her for 14 months in the marriage bed. Only this time she remembered all at once that there was no bed beside her at all anymore, only a mattress on the floor of a small room in an apartment she barely knew. She lay there for a long moment with her hand resting on her stomach, feeling the small flutter of movement that had started only weeks before, a reminder that she was not truly alone, even if it felt that way. Her phone buzzed on the floor beside her. She almost ignored it, certain it would be Dante, but when she checked the screen, it was her lawyer, a sharp and steady woman named Grace Bennett who had agreed to take the case even after hearing whose name was attached to it. "He has not signed yet," Grace said when Alina answered, "but my sources tell me he already knows every clause in that folder by heart. Men like him do not sign quickly. They study first." "Let him study," Alina said. "I am not going anywhere." "That is what worries me," Grace admitted. "Men like Dante Marchetti do not lose gracefully. I need you to be careful. Change your routine. Do not go anywhere alone if you can help it. I have already arranged for a driver you can trust." Alina thanked her and ended the call, then sat on the edge of the mattress for a long time, staring at the boxes stacked against the wall. She thought about the life she had imagined when she first married Dante, back when she believed the coldness in his eyes was something she alone could soften. She had been 23 years old, dazzled by a man who filled every room he entered, who spoke to her like she mattered even as everyone around them treated her like a decoration on his arm. She remembered their wedding day clearly. The church had been full of men in tailored suits who nodded respectfully at Dante and looked at her like a question mark, an outsider who did not understand what she had married into. She remembered thinking, foolishly, that love would be enough to bridge that gap. She remembered believing that if she was patient, if she gave him time, the walls around his heart would eventually come down for her. 2 years later, she understood how wrong she had been. She spent the morning unpacking boxes, filling the small kitchen with plates that did not match and cups that had come from a second-hand shop near her old neighborhood, back before she married into money and started pretending the money mattered more than it did. There was something almost peaceful in the simplicity of it, arranging a life that belonged only to her. A knock at the door interrupted her around noon. She froze for a moment, her heart jumping into her throat, before she remembered that Dante did not know this address, that only Sal and Grace had it, and neither of them would knock like that. 3 sharp raps followed by silence. She approached the door slowly and looked through the peephole. A man she did not recognize stood on the other side, well-dressed, calm, with the kind of face that gave nothing away. "Who is it?" she called through the door. "My name is Nico Belandi," the man answered, his voice smooth and unhurried. "I am not here to cause trouble, Mrs. Marchetti. I only wish to speak with you for a moment, about your safety." Alina's blood ran cold. She knew that name. Everyone in Dante's world knew that name. The Belandi family had been rivals of the Marchettis for as long as anyone could remember, and if Nico Belandi knew where she lived less than a day after she left her husband, then no address in this city would ever truly be safe. "I have nothing to say to you," she said through the door, her voice steadier than she felt. "That is unfortunate," Nico said, "because I believe we might be able to help each other. I will leave my card. Should you change your mind, the offer will remain open." She heard the soft sound of paper sliding beneath the door, followed by footsteps retreating down the hallway. She did not move for a long time, staring at the small white card lying against the floor, a phone number printed beneath a name that carried more danger than any threat Dante could have made himself. She did not pick it up right away. She simply stood there, one hand pressed against her stomach, and understood with a clarity that frightened her that leaving Dante had not made her safe. It had only changed the shape of the danger she now had to face alone. That evening, Sal called to check on her, just as he had promised. She told him about the visit, about the card still lying untouched on her floor, and there was a long silence on the other end of the line before he spoke again. "Do not touch that card," he said. "Burn it if you have to. Nico Belandi does not do anything out of kindness. If he is already at your door, it means he sees an opportunity, and men like him only see opportunity in other people's pain." "I know that," Alina said. "I'm not foolish, Sal." "I never said you were," Sal answered, softer now. "I am only asking you to be careful. You are not just protecting yourself anymore. You are protecting a child who has not even taken a first breath yet." Alina looked down at her stomach again, at the small life she had promised herself she would fight for, no matter what it cost her. "I will be careful," she said, "but I will not run back to Dante out of fear. I would rather face every danger this city can offer than spend one more night pretending to be happy in a marriage built on lies." Sal did not argue with her. He simply told her to lock her doors and call him if anything else happened, and after he hung up, Alina sat alone in the quiet apartment with the white card still lying on the floor, a single reminder that the night she walked away from Dante Marchetti had not ended anything at all. It had only just begun. The first threat arrived 3 days later, disguised as a bouquet of white roses. Alina found them sitting outside her apartment door when she returned from a doctor's appointment. No card attached, no note explaining who sent them, only a small folded paper tucked between the stems that read, in handwriting she recognized instantly, "This is not over." She stood in the hallway holding the flowers for a long moment before she carried them inside, and dropped them straight into the trash. She had learned, over 2 years of marriage, to recognize every version of Dante's anger, and this quiet, elegant threat was somehow more frightening than shouting would have been. Her phone rang an hour later. Grace Bennett's name flashed on the screen. "He is fighting the papers," Grace said without any greeting at all. "His lawyers filed a response this morning. They are claiming the marriage is not irreparably broken, that reconciliation is still possible, and they are requesting a delay before any proceedings continue." "That is ridiculous," Alina said. "He knows exactly why I left." "I know," Grace said, "but delay is a weapon, Alina. Every week this stretches out is another week he has to change your mind or change the situation entirely. I need you to prepare yourself. This will not be simple." "Nothing about my marriage was ever simple," Alina answered, and Grace did not disagree. That night, unable to sleep, Alina found herself thinking back to the early days with Dante, memories she had not let herself revisit since she left. She remembered the first time she saw him, at a charity event her father had dragged her to, back when her father still believed that connecting his struggling business to powerful families was the only way to survive. Dante had crossed the room like he owned it, and when he spoke to her, he had looked at her the way no one else in that room had, like she was the only person worth noticing. She had not known then what that attention would cost her. She had not understood in those early months that being noticed by a man like Dante Marchetti meant becoming part of a world with rules she never agreed to. She remembered the wedding negotiations, how her father's business debts had somehow become tangled up with the marriage contract, how she had told herself at 23 that it did not matter because she loved him or believed she did, and love was supposed to be enough to make anything work. For the first year, it almost had been. Dante had been attentive in his own careful way, present at dinners, quick with small gifts that meant nothing and everything at once. She remembered believing, foolishly, that the coldness she sometimes saw in his eyes was reserved only for his enemies, that with her, he was different. Then the late nights started, the missed calls, the excuses that grew thinner with each passing month, until Alina stopped asking questions because she was tired of hearing lies dressed up as truth. She had suspected Renata for months before she found proof. She remembered the exact night the suspicion crystallized into certainty, a receipt left carelessly in the pocket of one of Dante's coats, a hotel far from any of his usual business, a date that matched a night he claimed to be meeting with associates from another city. She had said nothing at first. She had told herself she needed proof before she made any accusation, because a man like Dante would deny everything without evidence, and she refused to be dismissed as a jealous, foolish wife. It had taken 3 more months of quiet investigation, careful questions to people she trusted, before she finally had enough to be certain. And even then, she had waited, gathering herself, preparing the only way she knew how, until the night she walked into that penthouse with the divorce papers already signed. Her memories were interrupted by a knock at the door, softer this time than Nico Belandi's had been. She checked the peephole and found Sal standing outside, alone, his expression tight with worry. "He sent flowers," she told Sal as she led him inside. "And now his lawyers are trying to delay everything." "I heard," Sal said, settling into the small chair by her kitchen table. "He is not thinking clearly right now, Alina. I have known him since we were children, and I have never seen him like this." "Like what?" Alina asked. Sal hesitated before answering. Afraid, he finally said, "I have seen him angry more times than I can count. I have seen him ruthless, calculating, even cruel when the situation demanded it. But I have never seen him afraid until the night you walked out of that penthouse." Alina crossed her arms, unmoved. He should have thought about that before he chose someone else over his own wife. "I am not defending him," Sal said quickly. "I am only telling you what I see, because I think you deserve to understand what you are dealing with. A man like Dante does not know how to lose something quietly. If he cannot win you back through delay and pressure, he may try something else entirely. What do you mean? Alina asked, a chill settling over her. I mean you need to be careful, Sal said. Not just with Nico Belandi circling, with Dante himself. I do not believe he would ever hurt you directly, but desperation makes men do things they would never otherwise consider, and I have watched him grow more desperate every single day since you left. Alina sat down slowly across from him, one hand resting on her stomach out of habit now, a gesture she barely noticed herself making anymore. Tell me something, she said. If you believe he is capable of anything, why are you still loyal to him? Sal considered the question for a long moment. Because loyalty and love are not always about believing someone is right, he said finally. Sometimes they are about staying close enough to stop someone from becoming worse than they already are. I am not here because I think Dante deserves you back. I am here because I think you deserve the truth, whatever it costs me to give it. After Sal left, Alina sat alone in her small kitchen for a long time, turning his words over in her mind. She had spent 2 years excusing Dante's coldness, telling herself it was simply the price of loving a complicated man. Now, hearing Sal describe him as afraid, as desperate, she felt something shift inside her, not sympathy exactly, but a clearer understanding of the man she had married. He had built his entire life around control, around never losing anything he considered his. Losing her was not something his mind knew how to process, and that made him dangerous in ways she had not fully considered before. Across the city, in an office far removed from the warmth of any home, Dante sat behind his desk while Renata paced in front of him, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. You need to fight this properly, Renata said. Delay is not enough. You need to show her that leaving you comes with consequences. Dante looked up at her, his expression unreadable. Careful, he said quietly. You are speaking about my wife. Renata stopped pacing, startled by the edge in his voice. Your soon-to-be ex-wife, she corrected, and I am only saying what you already know. If you let her walk away without consequence, every family in this city will see it as weakness. They will start circling before the ink is even dry on those papers. I know exactly what they will do, Dante said. I have spent my entire life anticipating exactly how vultures behave. Then act like it, Renata pressed. Formalize things between us. Show the city that you have already moved on, that her leaving means nothing to you. Dante's jaw tightened, and for a moment something dangerous flickered behind his eyes, something Renata had not seen directed at her before. Get out, he said quietly. Excuse me, Renata said, stunned. I said get out, Dante repeated, rising from his chair. I did not ask for your strategy. I did not ask you to speak about Alina at all. You are not in a position to formalize anything, Renata. You never were. Renata's face flushed with anger and something closer to fear as she realized, perhaps for the first time, that whatever place she believed she held in Dante's life was far less secure than she had convinced herself it was. You cannot be serious, she said. After everything, you are choosing her. I am not choosing anyone, Dante said coldly. I am simply reminding you of your place, which is apparently something I failed to make clear before now. Renata left the office without another word, her heels striking the floor harder with every step, her mind already turning toward other ways to secure the future she believed she deserved. Alone again, Dante sat back down at his desk and stared at the delayed court filing his lawyers had prepared, buying him time he was not entirely certain how to use. He thought of Alina's face the night she found him, the steadiness in her voice when she told him she was done waiting to deserve better. He had spent 2 years assuming her patience meant weakness, that her quiet acceptance of his absences meant she would always be there no matter what he did. He understood now how wrong that assumption had been, and understanding it did nothing to soften the fear rising in his chest at the thought of losing her completely, along with the child she carried, A child he had barely allowed himself to think about amid everything else. A child who was, in a matter of months, going to exist in the world whether Dante was ready or not. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he had not called in years, an old contact who specialized in matters Dante preferred to keep far from his legitimate lawyers. When the call connected, his voice was low and controlled. "I need information," Dante said, "on the Belandi family and whether they have made any contact with someone close to me." The voice on the other end asked for a name. "Elena Marchetti," Dante said, and something tightened in his chest as he said it, a mixture of protectiveness and dread he did not fully understand himself. "My wife." Somewhere across the city, the small white card Nico Belandi had slipped beneath Elena's door still sat untouched in a drawer, waiting for a decision she had not yet made, while two dangerous men, on opposite sides of a war neither of them had started but both of them were determined to win, began circling closer to the same fragile, uncertain center. 2 days later, Elena's phone rang with a number she did not recognize. She almost let it go to silence, but something made her answer, some instinct that had grown sharper since the night she left the penthouse. "Mrs. Marchetti," a woman's voice said, smooth and confident. "This is Renata Cole. I believe we should talk." Elena's fingers tightened around the phone. "There is nothing you and I need to discuss," she said. "I think there is," Renata replied. "You left, and yet Dante still refuses to move forward with his life. I have to wonder if you understand what you are holding on to. He does not love easily, Mrs. Marchetti. Whatever softness he once showed you, I promise you it has already transferred elsewhere." "If that were true," Elena said evenly, "you would not have needed to call me at all." There was a brief pause on the line, long enough that Elena almost believed she had struck closer to the truth than Renata wanted to admit. "I am only trying to make this easier for both of us," Renata finally said. "Sign whatever is necessary to finish this quickly. Take whatever settlement his lawyers offer and disappear quietly. It would be better for everyone, especially for a child who does not need to grow up in the middle of a war between families." "Do not speak about my child," Elena said, her voice suddenly hard as stone. "You do not get to use my baby as a bargaining chip in whatever plan you think you are running." "I am not the one who put that child in danger," Renata said coolly. "I am not the one connected to men like Nico Belandi." The words landed like a blow, and Elena's breath caught in her throat. "How do you know about that?" she asked. "Dante has people watching you," Renata said. "For your protection, he claims, though I suspect it has more to do with his pride than any real concern. Either way, I know Belandi came to your door. I know you still have not called him back. I would be careful how long you wait, Mrs. Marchetti. Men like that do not offer patience for free." Elena ended the call without responding, her hand trembling slightly as she set the phone down on the counter. She stood in her kitchen for a long moment, trying to steady her breathing, trying to separate the manipulation in Renata's words from whatever small kernel of truth might be buried inside them. She thought about calling Sal to tell him about the conversation, but something stopped her. She was tired, suddenly and completely, of every decision in her life being shaped by what the people around Dante wanted her to do. She had left the marriage to reclaim some piece of herself that had been buried under 2 years of quiet compliance, and she refused to let Renata's threats, however real they might be, push her back into that same passive fear. Instead, she sat down at her small kitchen table and opened her laptop, searching for apartments even further from the world Dante controlled, cities where the name Marchetti carried no weight at all, where she and her child might someday build a life untouched by any of this. It was only a search, nothing decided, but it felt like the first real choice she had made purely for herself in longer than she could remember. That evening, as the sky outside her window turned deep orange with the last light of day, Elena allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, a future entirely her own. A small house somewhere quiet, A child who grew up without bodyguards or threats slipped beneath the door. A version of herself who did not flinch every time her phone rang. It was only a moment, fragile and brief, before reality settled back over her, reminding her that leaving Dante Marchetti was never going to be as simple as walking out a door. But even a brief moment of imagined peace was more than she had allowed herself in longer than she could remember, and she held on to it as tightly as she could, like a small flame cupped carefully against the wind. Gunfire echoed 2 streets away from Alina's apartment on the night. She finally decided to call the number on Nico Belandi's card, and though the shots had nothing to do with her directly, the sound rattled through her chest like a warning she could not ignore any longer. She stood by her window for a long time after the sound faded, watching red and blue lights flash somewhere in the distance, before she finally picked up her phone and dialed the number she had kept in a drawer for over a week. "Mrs. Marchetti," Nico answered on the second ring, as though he had been waiting for her call the entire time. "I was beginning to think you had thrown my card away." "I almost did," Alina said. "I am only calling because I want to understand what you actually want from me. Not vague promises about safety, the truth." There was a brief pause, and when Nico spoke again, his voice had lost some of its earlier smoothness, replaced by something more direct. "The truth is simple," he said. "Dante Marchetti has spent years taking territory that once belonged to my family. He has spent years insulting my father, undermining our business, treating us as though we are beneath him. I am not interested in hurting you or your child, Mrs. Marchetti. I am interested in weakening him, and a wife who walks away publicly, especially one who might be willing to speak about what she witnessed inside that world, would do exactly that without either of us needing to lift a hand in violence." "You want me to testify against him," Alina said slowly, "or expose him somehow?" "I want you to consider your options," Nico said. "I can offer protection that has nothing to do with Marchetti money or Marchetti guilt. A clean start somewhere far from this city, resources for you and your child, security that does not depend on the goodwill of a man who has already shown you exactly how little his promises are worth." "And in exchange," Alina said. "In exchange, I would ask for information," Nico said simply. "Nothing that would put you in danger, only what you already know from being his wife. Financial patterns, people he trusts, places he considers safe." Alina closed her eyes, her hand instinctively pressing against her stomach. "You are asking me to betray him." "I am asking you to protect yourself," Nico corrected. "Whatever loyalty you feel you owe that man, ask yourself honestly whether he has ever shown you the same loyalty in return." She did not answer right away. The truth was more complicated than either of them wanted it to be, tangled up in 2 years of memory, in the fear that had followed her out of that penthouse, in the flowers left outside her door, and the phone call from Renata dripping with false concern. She did not owe Dante anything, but betraying him to his enemies felt like stepping into a different kind of danger entirely, one she was not certain she could control once it began. "I need time," she finally said. "Do not take too long," Nico replied. "Things are moving quickly in this city, Mrs. Marchetti, whether you decide to be part of them or not." The call ended, and Alina sat alone in the dark apartment for a long time afterward, turning his words over in her mind, weighing every possibility against the safety of the child she carried. She did not know that, less than a mile away, Sal was sitting across from Dante in a private room at the back of a restaurant the family had used for decades, delivering news that made Dante's expression turn to stone. "Belandi contacted her again," Sal said. "She called him this time, not the other way around. My source could not confirm what was said, but the call lasted almost 10 minutes. Dante's hand tightened around the glass in front of him until his knuckles went pale. "She would not," he said. "She would never work with him." "You do not know that anymore," Sal said carefully. "You do not know her the way you think you do, Dante. Not after everything. People change when they feel they have nothing left to lose." Dante set the glass down hard enough that the sound cracked across the quiet room. "Find out what he offered her," he said, "and find out if she is seriously considering it." "And if she is?" Sal asked. "Then I need to speak with her myself," Dante said, "before Belandi convinces her that I am the only danger in her life, when the truth is that everything Belandi touches ends in blood eventually. He is not offering her safety. He is offering her a leash disguised as freedom." Sal studied his cousin carefully, noting something in his expression that had not been there before, a rawness beneath the usual careful control. "You are afraid," he said quietly. "Not of losing territory, of losing her completely." Dante did not deny it. He simply stared down at the cracked glass in front of him, at the small dark stain of liquid spreading across the white tablecloth, and said nothing at all, which was, in its own way, an answer more honest than anything he could have spoken aloud. That night Dante did something he had not done in the 2 weeks since Alina left. He drove to her apartment himself, alone, without informing Sal or any of the men who usually accompanied him everywhere he went. He sat in his car across the street for nearly an hour, watching the soft light glowing behind her curtains, debating whether approaching her directly would help his case or destroy whatever small chance remained of repairing what he had broken. In the end, he did not knock. He simply watched the light finally go dark, watched the building settle into stillness, and drove away with a weight in his chest he did not have words for, a feeling dangerously close to grief for something that was not yet fully lost, but felt, more and more with each passing day, like it might slip away from him completely. The next morning, Alina woke to a soft knock at her door, gentler than either of the 2 visits she had received before. When she looked through the peephole, she found Sal standing alone, his expression unusually careful. "He came here last night," Sal said as soon as she let him inside. "He did not tell me. One of the men keeping watch on the street reported it back to me this morning." Alina's stomach tightened. "Did he try to come in?" "No," Sal said. "He only sat outside for almost an hour and then left. I'm not telling you this to frighten you. I am telling you because I think you deserve to know exactly how far this has gone, on both sides. Belandi calling you, Dante watching your building in the middle of the night. This is no longer simply about a marriage ending, Alina. This is becoming something much larger, and I am worried that you are standing directly in the middle of it without enough protection." "I spoke to Nico," Alina admitted, watching Sal's expression shift immediately into alarm. "He wants information about Dante. In exchange, he is offering me a new life somewhere far from all of this." Sal's jaw tightened. "Tell me you did not agree to anything." "I told him I needed time," Alina said. "I do not know what the right choice is anymore, Sal. I am trying to protect my child, and every direction I turn, someone is offering me protection wrapped around a demand I am not sure I can afford to pay." Sal sat down slowly across from her, rubbing a hand over his face. "Do not trust Belandi," he said. "Whatever he promises you, understand that men like him do not offer anything without eventually collecting a debt far larger than what was originally agreed. If you give him information about Dante's operations, you become a target the moment that information is used, whether you intended it that way or not. Belandi will not protect you from the consequences of what you give him. He will only protect his own interests." "And Dante," Alina asked, "what happens if I do nothing at all?" "Then Dante continues fighting the divorce through delay and pressure," Sal said honestly. "And eventually, when delay no longer works, I do not know what he will do next. I have never seen him lose something he wanted to keep this badly. I am not certain even I can predict what he becomes if he loses you and the child entirely." Alina sat in silence for a long moment, absorbing the weight of everything Sal had told her, feeling the walls of her carefully rebuilt independence pressing in from every direction. She thought of Nico's offer, of the clean start it promised, and she thought of Dante sitting outside her building in the dark, unable to bring himself to knock, caught somewhere between the man his world demanded he be and whatever remained of the man she once believed she loved. "I am not going to help either of them destroy the other," she finally said. "I did not leave one dangerous situation only to walk directly into another. Whatever happens between Dante and Nico Belandi, it will happen without my help." Sal nodded slowly, something like respect flickering across his tired features. "That may be the wisest thing anyone in this entire situation has said in weeks," he told her. But even as she said the words aloud, Alina understood that refusing to choose a side did not guarantee her safety. In a war between two powerful men, neutrality was rarely respected, and somewhere in the city, both Dante and Nico were already making decisions that would eventually force her hand, whether she was ready or not. Across town, Renata Cole sat in her apartment staring at her phone, replaying the conversation she had overheard between Dante and one of his men earlier that day. Fragments of a plan to increase security around Alina's building, orders given with an urgency Renata had never once heard directed toward protecting her own safety. She poured herself a drink and drank it too quickly, anger and humiliation twisting together in her chest. She had given Dante 14 months of her life, had rearranged her own plans and relationships around his schedule, had convinced herself, slowly and carefully, that she was building toward something permanent. Watching him unravel over a wife who had already left him felt like a special kind of insult, one she was not willing to simply absorb in silence. She thought about the number Alina had surely blocked by now, about the failed attempt to convince her to disappear quietly. If persuasion would not work, Renata decided, perhaps a different kind of pressure would. She picked up her phone again and dialed a contact she had cultivated carefully over the past year, a journalist who specialized in exposing the private lives of powerful families, someone who would pay generously for information about a mafia boss's collapsing marriage, especially details about a pregnant wife hiding in a modest apartment on the edge of the city. Renata hesitated only briefly before she began to speak, telling herself that she was not betraying anyone, only accelerating a conclusion that was inevitable regardless of what she did. If Alina's location became public, if the pressure from unwanted attention became too much for her to bear, perhaps she would finally agree to the quiet settlement everyone except Dante seemed to want. She did not consider, in that moment, how quickly information traveled once it left her hands, or how many dangerous men in the city would be listening for exactly this kind of opportunity. Meanwhile, Dante sat in his office reviewing security reports with a focus he had not brought to any other part of his life in weeks. He had doubled the number of men watching Alina's street, had arranged for a car to follow her lawyer's movements, had spent considerable resources trying to determine exactly what Nico Belandi was offering his wife, and how close she might be to accepting it. Sal entered without knocking, closing the door firmly behind him. "You are spending more effort protecting her than you have spent on any territory dispute in years," he observed, settling into the chair across from Dante's desk. "She is not a territory dispute," Dante said without looking up from the reports in front of him. "No," Sal agreed. "She is something you are only now realizing you cannot simply take back through force, and it is eating you alive watching her slip further from your control every single day." Dante finally looked up, his eyes tired in a way Sal had rarely seen on him before. "I do not know how to fix this," he admitted quietly, the words costing him something visible in the tightness around his mouth. "I have spent my entire life solving problems by removing whatever stands in my way. I cannot remove myself from my own mistakes, Sal. I cannot threaten my way back into her trust." "Then perhaps threats were never the answer to begin with," Sal said carefully. "Perhaps you actually have to earn something for once in your life, instead of simply taking it." Dante's jaw tightened at the suggestion, old instincts warring visibly against something newer and far less comfortable. a creeping understanding that his cousin might be right in a way that challenged everything he believed about how power worked in his world. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent message from one of his men monitoring outside contacts. He read it twice, his expression darkening with each word. "What is it?" Sal asked, watching the change come over his cousin's face. "Renata," Dante said, his voice flat with barely contained fury. "She has been speaking with a journalist. About Alina. About the divorce, the pregnancy, everything." Sal swore under his breath, already reaching for his own phone. "How much does the journalist know?" "Enough," Dante said, rising sharply from his desk. "Enough to put Alina's location at risk if this becomes public before we can control it. Get someone to that apartment immediately. I do not care what it costs." As Sal made the calls, Dante stood by the window staring out at the city lights, feeling something cold settle into his chest that had nothing to do with anger toward Nico Belandi, or even toward Renata's reckless betrayal. It was fear, plain and undeniable, fear that his own carelessness, his own inability to end things properly with Renata before Alina ever discovered the truth, had now created a danger that threatened not only his wife, but the child neither of them had ever truly discussed together. A child who deserved a chance at safety that neither of its parents' choices had yet managed to guarantee. For the first time since Alina walked out of that penthouse with divorce papers in her hand, Dante Marchetti understood that protecting her was no longer something he could accomplish through money, through threats, or through the sheer force of his reputation alone. It would require something far more difficult, something he had spent his entire adult life avoiding. It would require him to change. Whether he was capable of that change before the danger closing in around Alina became impossible to contain remained the only question that mattered now. And time, unlike money or power, was something not even a man like Dante Marchetti could simply take by force. Glass shattered across Alina's kitchen floor at nearly midnight, and she was on her feet with her heart pounding before she even understood what had happened. A brick wrapped in paper lying among the shards near her feet, a warning delivered without a single word spoken aloud. She backed away from the broken window, her hands shaking as she reached for her phone, and only then did she notice the note taped around the brick, block letters scrawled in a hand she did not recognize. "Stop protecting Marchetti's secrets, or the next one will not miss." Her first call was to Sal, her voice unsteady in a way it had not been since the night she left the penthouse. Within minutes, 2 of Dante's men were at her door, and within 20, Dante himself arrived, moving through her apartment with a controlled fury that filled the small space entirely. "Are you hurt?" he asked, crossing the room to her before he had even acknowledged anyone else in the apartment. "I am fine," Alina said, though the tremor in her voice suggested otherwise. "The brick barely missed me. Someone wanted to send a message, not actually hurt anyone tonight." Dante's eyes moved over her carefully, checking for injury she insisted she did not have, before something in his expression hardened into cold, focused calculation. "Belandi," he said. "This has his signature written all over it. A message wrapped around a threat, meant to frighten rather than kill outright, at least for now." "Or it was meant to punish me for not giving him what he wanted," Alina said quietly. "I told him I needed time. Perhaps he decided time was a luxury he was no longer willing to offer." Sal appeared in the doorway then, his expression grim. "There is more," he said, glancing meaningfully at Dante before continuing. "The journalist Renata contacted published a story an hour ago. It does not name the address directly, but it describes the general area, mentions the pregnancy, mentions the divorce filing. Anyone looking hard enough could find this building within a day." Dante's fists clenched at his sides, and for a moment the fury radiating from him was aimed at everyone in the room at once, at Belandi for the threat, at Renata for the betrayal that made Alina's location vulnerable in the first place, and most painfully at himself, for every choice that had led to this exact moment. His pregnant wife standing in a room with broken glass at her feet because of decisions he alone had made. "You are not staying here another night," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I am not going back to that penthouse," Alina said immediately, some old instinct rising to meet his authority the way she had trained herself never to do again. "I am not asking you to," Dante said, softer now, something raw bleeding through the careful control he usually maintained. "I have a property outside the city, secure, unknown to anyone outside my closest circle. Sal will stay there with you. I will not step foot inside unless you ask me to. But I cannot leave you here tonight, Alina. Not with this kind of danger already at your door." Alina looked at the broken window, at the brick still lying among shattered glass on her kitchen floor, and understood, with a clarity that outweighed her pride, that refusing his help out of stubbornness would only endanger the child she was trying so desperately to protect. "Fine," she said finally, "but this changes nothing between us." "I am not asking it to," Dante said, though something in his eyes suggested he wished, quietly and desperately, that it might. They left within the hour, a small convoy of cars moving through the dark city streets toward the safe house outside its borders. Alina sat in silence during the drive, watching the lights of the city fade behind them, while Dante rode in a separate vehicle ahead, coordinating with his men about locating whoever had thrown the brick and confirming exactly how much information the published story had actually revealed. The safe house was modest compared to the penthouse Alina had left behind, a quiet farmhouse surrounded by open fields, far removed from the glass towers and crowded streets of the city. Sal settled her into a comfortable room upstairs while armed men took up positions around the property, and for the first time in weeks, Alina allowed herself to feel something close to physical safety, even as the emotional turmoil of everything else continued churning beneath the surface. She did not see Dante again until the following morning, when she found him standing alone in the kitchen, exhaustion etched deeply into his face, a cup of coffee cooling untouched on the counter in front of him. "You did not sleep," Alina observed, taking in the dark circles beneath his eyes. "Neither did you," he said, glancing at her with something gentler than she expected. She sat down across from him at the small kitchen table, the silence between them heavy with everything neither of them had said since the night she left. Finally, she spoke. "Tell me the truth, Dante, all of it, not the version that protects your pride. The real truth about Renata, about how long it went on, about why you let it happen at all." Dante was quiet for a long moment, and Alina watched him war visibly with old instincts that told him vulnerability was weakness, that admitting fault gave enemies leverage they could later use against him. "It started before we married," he finally admitted, and Alina's breath caught sharply in her chest. "Not seriously. A casual arrangement that existed before I ever met you, one I told myself I had ended when we married. But it never fully ended. I let it continue in the background because it was easier than confronting what it meant that I had entered a marriage I did not fully understand how to make real." "You did not love me," Alina said quietly, not quite a question. "I did not know how to," Dante said, and the honesty in his voice was more painful than any lie could have been. "I was raised to see marriage as a transaction, a merger of interests, nothing more. I did not understand, until you were already gone, that what I felt for you had become something far beyond that arrangement. I told myself the coldness protected us both. I understand now that it only destroyed the one thing in my life that could have actually made me better than what my father raised me to be." Alina sat with his words for a long moment, feeling the weight of 2 years of loneliness finally meet an explanation that, while it did not excuse anything, at least offered something closer to truth than she had ever received from him before. "That does not fix what you did," she said. "I know," Dante answered immediately. "I am not asking it to fix anything. I am only trying, for the first time, to give you honesty instead of control." Before either of them could say more, Sal burst into the kitchen, his expression tight with urgency. "We have a location on whoever threw the brick," he said. "And it is not good news. It traces back to a man connected to Belandi, confirmed now through 2 separate sources. But there is something else. Renata has been seen meeting with him directly, twice in the past week." Dante's expression shifted instantly from vulnerability back into cold, focused calculation, the transformation so complete that Alina felt a small chill watching it happen. "Renata is working with Belandi," he said slowly, pieces clicking together with terrible clarity. "Not simply reckless, deliberate. She wanted Alina exposed because it served both her own interests and Belandi's at once." "That would explain the article," Sal said grimly. "And possibly the brick as well. If Belandi believes pressuring Alina will pull information from her, and Renata is feeding him access alongside her own personal motives, this is far more coordinated than we initially believed." Alina felt sick, the full scope of the danger settling over her at once. "She used me," she said quietly. "Renata used the pretense of concern to figure out where I was staying, then handed that information straight to the one man in this city actually dangerous enough to act on it." Dante's hands curled into fists on the table, his voice dropping into something low and lethal that Alina had heard directed at others before, but never quite like this, never with this particular weight of protective fury behind it. "This ends now," he said. "Renata does not get to use my mistakes as a weapon against my family, and Belandi does not get to threaten my wife and think there will be no consequence at all." "Dante," Alina said, a note of caution entering her voice despite everything, "whatever you are about to do, think carefully. Violence only invites more violence. I do not want my child born into a war that never ends." Dante looked at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes, old instinct battling against the truth of what she was asking him to consider. "I hear you," he finally said, "but I cannot promise you inaction, Alina, not when your safety is what is being threatened. What I can promise is that whatever I do next will be calculated, controlled, and aimed only at ending the threat, not expanding it." It was not the full reassurance Alina wanted, but it was, she recognized, the most honest answer he was capable of giving in that moment. A man raised entirely within a world built on power now trying, imperfectly, and for the first time, to weigh that power against something softer, something that mattered more to him than he had ever allowed himself to admit before. Renata arrived at the meeting expecting reconciliation, dressed carefully, her expression rehearsed into something soft and apologetic, the kind of performance she had perfected over 14 months of managing Dante's moods. Instead, she found the private room filled with people she had not expected, Sal standing near the door with his arms crossed, 2 other senior men from the organization seated along the far wall, and Dante himself standing at the head of the table with an expression colder than she had ever seen directed at her before. "I did not realize this was a formal meeting," Renata said, forcing lightness into her voice that immediately felt wrong in the tense silence of the room. "Sit down," Dante said simply. She obeyed, some instinct warning her that whatever came next would not be softened by charm or careful words. Dante placed a folder on the table in front of her, sliding it across without a word. She opened it slowly and found copies of communications, phone records, and photographs documenting her meetings with a man connected to the Belandi family, evidence assembled with the same ruthless precision Dante applied to any enemy who threatened his interests. "You gave Belandi information," Dante said, his voice quiet and terrible in its control. "You told a journalist where to look for my wife. You did this while pretending concern for a child you have never once asked about, a child whose safety you were willing to gamble for your own ambition." Renata's carefully composed expression cracked, panic bleeding through despite her effort to maintain control. "I was protecting my own future," she said. "You were never going to choose me over her, even before any of this happened. I could see it in the way you spoke about her, even while you were still in my bed. I was simply trying to survive in a world that was always going to leave me behind eventually. That does not excuse endangering a pregnant woman, Sal said sharply from his position near the door. Renata's eyes flicked toward him, then back to Dante, searching his face for any trace of the man who had once made promises to her in quiet moments neither of them had ever intended anyone else to witness. She found nothing there now except cold finality. "What happens to me?" she finally asked, her voice smaller than Dante had ever heard it. "You leave this city tonight," Dante said. "You do not contact Alina again. You do not speak to anyone connected to the Belandi family again. If I discover that you have violated either condition, the consequences will not be limited to a conversation in this room. Consider this the only mercy you will ever receive from me, and consider it more than you deserve." Renata left the room without another word, her earlier confidence entirely gone, replaced by the shaken understanding that whatever place she believed she once held in Dante's life had never truly existed at all, not in any way that could survive contact with the reality of who he actually loved. Once she was gone, Dante turned to the men still seated in the room, his expression shifting from cold finality into sharp, focused strategy. "Now Belandi," he said. "He believes he can threaten my family and hide behind Renata's information without consequence. That ends today." "What do you propose?" one of the senior men asked. "Not violence, not directly," Dante said, and Sal's eyebrows rose slightly in surprise at the restraint in his cousin's voice. "Belandi wants a war because he believes it will expose weakness in our organization while my personal life is in chaos. I refuse to give him that satisfaction. Instead, we expose him. Publicly. His attempt to manipulate a pregnant woman through threats and intimidation. His use of a journalist to endanger a family that has done nothing but try to survive his ambition. Every family in this city respects power, but they despise cowardice disguised as strategy. Once they understand exactly what Belandi attempted, his own alliances will begin questioning whether he is a partner worth protecting or a liability worth abandoning." Sal considered this for a long moment before nodding slowly. "It is a slower path than what you have taken before," he observed. "It is the only path that does not put Alina or the child in further danger," Dante said. "I told her I would act with control, not simply force. This is what control actually looks like, Sal, even though every instinct in me wants to handle this the way I was trained to handle every threat I have ever faced." The men in the room began discussing logistics, how information would be leaked, which families needed to hear it first, how quickly Belandi's own alliances might begin distancing themselves once the truth became clear. Dante listened, contributed, guided the strategy with the same sharp precision that had built his reputation across the city. But underneath the calculation, something had genuinely shifted in him, a willingness to choose the slower, harder path specifically, because it protected the people he claimed to love rather than simply satisfying his own wounded pride. Back at the farmhouse, Alina sat by the window watching the field stretch out toward the horizon, unaware of exactly what was unfolding across the city, but sensing, somehow, that the balance of danger surrounding her was beginning to shift. Sal returned late that evening, exhaustion written across his face but something like cautious relief in his eyes as well. "It is done," he told her simply, settling into the chair across from her. "Renata is gone from the city, and by tomorrow, every family that matters will know exactly what Belandi attempted. Dante chose exposure over violence, Alina. I did not think he had that kind of restraint in him, not truly, until I watched him choose it today." Alina absorbed this information slowly, feeling something complicated stir inside her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but perhaps the first fragile acknowledgement that the man she married might be capable of becoming someone different from the man who had broken her trust so completely. "Does this mean it is over?" she asked, The danger, I mean. Belandi will not risk open conflict once his own reputation is damaged this badly, Sal said. He is not foolish enough to invite a war he cannot win simply out of wounded pride. I believe you are safe now, Alina. Truly safe, for the first time since you left that penthouse. Alina nodded slowly, relief washing over her in a wave so strong it nearly brought tears to her eyes, tears she had been holding back through weeks of fear and uncertainty. But even as the immediate danger began to lift, she understood that the harder questions still remained unanswered, waiting quietly beneath the surface of everything else. What she was going to do about Dante himself, now that the threats around them had finally begun to fade. Pain tore through Alina's abdomen at 3 in the morning, sharp and sudden enough to pull her fully awake, and by the time she managed to sit up in bed, she understood immediately that something had changed, that whatever timeline she had imagined for this moment had just been rewritten by her own body without any warning at all. She called out for Sal, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and adrenaline, and within moments the farmhouse erupted into controlled chaos, men moving quickly through hallways, a car being brought around to the front entrance, Sal himself half-dressed and pale as he helped her down the stairs. "It is too early," Alina said between breaths, gripping the railing tightly as another wave of pain rolled through her. "I still have weeks left." "Babies do not always follow schedules," Sal said, trying to keep his voice steady for her sake even as his own concern was written plainly across his face. "We are getting you to the hospital right now. Everything is going to be fine." Someone had already called Dante before they even reached the car, and by the time they arrived at the hospital 20 minutes later, he was waiting outside the entrance, having driven faster than should have been possible from wherever he had been that night, his expression stripped of every careful mask he usually wore, nothing left but raw fear as he rushed to Alina's side. "I am here," he said, taking her hand as the medical staff moved her quickly toward the maternity ward. "I am not leaving, Alina. Whatever you need, whatever you want me to do, I am here." Alina, caught between pain and the overwhelming disorientation of everything happening faster than she could process, did not have the strength to argue with him, and in truth, some part of her did not want to. She gripped his hand tightly as another contraction rolled through her, and Dante stayed exactly where he was, matching her pace, absorbing the pressure of her grip without complaint, present in a way he had never once managed to be during the 2 years of their marriage. The hours that followed blurred together in a haze of pain and effort, and the steady presence of medical staff working calmly around her, Dante never leaving her side, speaking softly whenever the fear in her eyes grew too sharp, holding her hand through every single contraction as though letting go, even for a moment, was not something he was willing to consider. When their daughter finally arrived, small and impossibly loud, filling the room with her first furious cry at the world she had just entered, Alina felt every ounce of fear and exhaustion dissolve into something she did not have adequate words for, an overwhelming flood of love so immediate and complete that it nearly stole the breath from her lungs. Dante stood frozen for a long moment, staring at the tiny, wrinkled, screaming creature the nurse placed gently into Alina's arms, and something broke open in his chest that he had spent his entire adult life keeping carefully sealed away. He had built walls around every soft part of himself for so long that he had nearly forgotten what it felt like to be moved by something he could not control, could not threaten, could not simply take by force. "She is perfect," he said, his voice rough with emotion he made no effort to hide. Alina looked up at him, exhaustion etched across her face alongside something softer than she had allowed herself to feel toward him in weeks. "Do you want to hold her?" she asked. Dante hesitated, his hands, so capable of violence and control in every other part of his life, suddenly uncertain in the face of something this fragile and new. Alina guided their daughter gently into his arms, watching as his entire posture shifted, the hardened lines of his shoulders softening as he looked down at his daughter's small face for the first time. "I do not know how to be a father," he admitted quietly, his eyes never leaving the baby. "I did not have a good example. I do not know how to give her anything except the same coldness I was raised inside." "Then learn," Alina said simply. "The same way I am learning to trust you again, slowly, one honest choice at a time. Nobody starts out knowing how to do this, Dante. What matters is whether you are willing to try every single day, even when it is difficult, even when old habits pull you back toward control instead of connection." Dante looked up at her, something vulnerable and hopeful flickering across his face, an expression she had rarely seen from him even in the earliest days of their marriage. "Is that a chance?" he asked carefully. "Are you saying there is still a chance for us?" Alina considered the question honestly, weighing everything that had happened over the past weeks against the man standing in front of her now, holding their daughter with a gentleness that contradicted everything the city believed about Dante Marchetti. She thought about the fear, the betrayal, the long nights of loneliness inside a marriage built on convenient lies. She also thought about the honesty he had finally offered her at the farmhouse, about his restraint in choosing exposure over violence against Belandi, about the steady presence beside her hospital bed throughout the entire night, a presence that asked for nothing except permission to stay. "I am not promising you everything back the way it was," she said carefully. "I am not going back to a marriage where I wait quietly for scraps of your attention while you disappear into a life I am not allowed to fully understand. If there is a future for us, it has to be different. Real. Honest, even when honesty is difficult. You do not get to hide behind power anymore, Dante. Not with me and not with her." "I understand," Dante said, and for the first time, Alina believed him completely, believed that the words carried weight beyond simple desperation to avoid losing what he had already lost once. In the days following the birth, word of Nico Belandi's collapse spread through the city faster than anyone expected. The families who once respected his ambition now saw only a man willing to threaten a pregnant woman for leverage. And one by one, his allies began distancing themselves, unwilling to be associated with a name that had become synonymous with cowardice rather than strength. Within 2 weeks, Belandi quietly relocated his operations to another city entirely. His influence in Alina and Dante's world reduced to little more than a cautionary tale whispered among rival families. Dante told Alina about it during one of the long, quiet evenings at the hospital, sitting beside her bed while their daughter slept in the small bassinet nearby. "He is gone," Dante said simply. "He will not trouble you again." "And Renata?" Alina asked. "She left the city the same night I gave her the choice," Dante said. "I do not know where she went, and I made certain no one who works for me will ever seek her out again. Whatever she was to me, whatever mistake she represented, that chapter is finished completely." Alina studied his face carefully, searching for any trace of longing or regret, and found none, only the tired, steady honesty of a man who seemed determined, for the first time in his life, to mean exactly what he said. The first weeks at home tested them both in ways neither had fully anticipated. There were nights when their daughter's crying stretched on for hours, when exhaustion frayed the careful patience they had both been trying to build, when old habits threatened to resurface. Once, when a business matter pulled Dante away for an entire evening without warning, Alina felt the familiar cold dread of abandonment creeping back into her chest, memories of 14 months of missed dinners rising unbidden. He returned late that night to find her sitting silently in the nursery, arms crossed, refusing to look at him when he entered. "I should have called," Dante said immediately, reading the tension in the room without needing to be told. "There was a situation with a supplier that could not wait, and I let it consume my attention completely. That is not an excuse. It is simply the truth, and I am telling you because you deserve to know exactly where I was and why, instead of being left to wonder." Alina finally looked at him, weighing the honesty in his explanation against the old fear still living inside her. "That is the difference," she said quietly. "Not that you were called away. Things will always call you away sometimes. The difference is whether you tell me the truth about it afterward, instead of leaving me to imagine the worst." "I understand," Dante said, crossing the room to kneel beside her chair. "I am going to make mistakes, Alina. I am going to fall back into old patterns more than once, because 30 years of learning to control everything does not disappear in a few months. But I am asking you to let me keep trying, even when I stumble, instead of assuming every mistake means I have stopped caring." Alina reached out and touched his face gently, the first time she had initiated that kind of tenderness since before everything fell apart. "I am not asking for perfection," she said. "I am asking for honesty and effort and the truth even when the truth is uncomfortable. That is all I have ever really wanted from you, Dante. Not power, not protection built on secrecy, just the truth." Slowly, over the following weeks, small moments like that one began to accumulate into something steadier. Dante started coming home earlier, not out of obligation, but because he found himself wanting to be present for the small, ordinary moments of their daughter's early life, moments he had never imagined would matter to him as much as they did. He learned to warm a bottle at 2 in the morning, to recognize the different sounds of his daughter's cries, to sit quietly beside Alina on difficult nights without needing to fix or control anything at all, simply present, simply there. Sal watched the transformation with quiet astonishment, visiting often enough to witness the gradual shift in his cousin's demeanor, the way the hardened edges that had defined Dante for as long as Sal had known him began, slowly and imperfectly, to soften around the people he loved most. 3 months later, on a quiet afternoon with sunlight streaming through the windows of a house far removed from both the penthouse and the farmhouse, a house Alina had chosen herself, with Dante's full support rather than his control, Alina sat on the porch watching Dante walk slowly across the yard with their daughter cradled carefully against his chest, speaking softly to her about nothing in particular, the same way any ordinary father might on any ordinary day. Sal arrived partway through the afternoon, settling into a chair beside Alina, with the easy familiarity of someone who had earned his place in both of their lives through months of quiet loyalty and honest counsel. "He is different," Sal observed, watching Dante with something like genuine wonder in his voice. "I did not think I would ever see him like this. Soft, present. I spent years believing that side of him simply did not exist." "It took losing everything to find it," Alina said. "I am not naive, Sal. I know old habits do not disappear overnight. There will be difficult days ahead, moments where the man who built his life on control tries to slip back into old patterns. But he is trying, every single day, and that effort matters more to me now than any promise he could have made before." Sal nodded slowly, watching as Dante knelt down in the grass, letting their daughter's small hand wrap around his finger while he laughed softly at something only the two of them seemed to understand. "And Belandi," Sal asked, "Renata, do you still worry about either of them?" Alina considered the question, feeling the distance of months between herself and the fear that had once consumed every part of her life. "Belandi's reputation never recovered from what became public," she said, "and Renata disappeared from this city completely. I do not think either of them poses a threat any longer, not the way they once did. But I have learned something important through all of this, Sal. Danger does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes the greatest threats hide behind quiet excuses and careful lies, the same way Dante's did for 2 years before I finally saw them clearly." Dante rose from the grass and walked toward the porch, their daughter still cradled gently in his arms, her small face peaceful in sleep. He climbed the steps and settled into the chair beside Alina, close enough that their shoulders touched, a small gesture of intimacy that would have been unthinkable between them only months before. "She fell asleep before I even finished the story," he said, a soft smile pulling at the corner of his mouth, an expression that had rarely appeared on his face before their daughter's arrival. "What story?" Alina asked. "About her mother," Dante said quietly, meeting Alina's eyes with something raw and honest in his gaze. "About the bravest woman I have ever known, who walked into a room full of danger and walked back out again with nothing but her own strength to carry her forward, who refused to accept less than she deserved even when the entire world around her expected her to stay quiet and grateful for whatever scraps she was given." Alina felt her chest tighten with emotion, watching him hold their sleeping daughter with a tenderness that had taken nearly losing everything to uncover. "I am not the same woman who walked into that penthouse with divorce papers," she said softly. "That woman was afraid, even as she tried to be brave." "And who are you now?" Dante asked. Alina looked out across the quiet yard, at the life she had built from the wreckage of everything that came before, a life still uncertain in many ways but grounded now in something real, something honest, something she had chosen for herself rather than simply accepted because it was easier than fighting for more. "I am someone who knows exactly what she is worth," Alina said, reaching over to rest her hand gently on top of their daughter's small back. "And I am someone who will never again mistake silence for peace or control for love." Dante reached for her free hand, holding it carefully, the same way he had held it through every contraction in that hospital room months before. And for the first time since the night everything fell apart, Alina allowed herself to believe that whatever came next, they would face it honestly together, with nothing hidden behind closed doors or quiet excuses ever again. The sun continued its slow descent over the quiet yard, casting long golden light across the porch where a family that had nearly destroyed itself now sat together in fragile, hard-won peace, 3 lives bound not by convenience or arrangement anymore, but by something they had all fought hard to earn.